Today, I want to talk about the spiritual importance of hope. You probably know that the church has many seasons, and the one that comes just before Christmas is called Advent. And one of the key themes of Advent is hope. There's a sense that the world is waiting in darkness and hoping for something better. The birth of Jesus into the world represents that hope realized. The light has come into the world. That makes this a good season to talk about hope, but honestly, it doesn't feel right now like there's much to be hopeful about. In our political life, we can feel the polarization in our culture stagnating our politics. We fear that if something doesn't change, we could move toward violence. In our cities, violent crimes has skyrocketed. I know in Washington, D.C., we're up 500% of an increase in violent crime. And just as we ended our mask mandates a couple of weeks ago here, and we were feeling we were beyond the Delta virus variant, then the Omicron mutation began to sweep the globe, with experts suggesting people stop their international travel. And then there's climate change. Scientists have warned us that based on our 200-year abuse of fossil fuels, we've only got a decade or two before the Earth's entire weather pattern is thrown out of whack, and that parts of the world will be underwater, while the rest of us will experience violence and dangerous weather that will likely lead to political unrest. We were an anxious people going into a pandemic, but mental health issues have skyrocketed since the pandemic. So that's a cheery message. Floods, plagues, crimes, violence. It doesn't make for a very hopeful Christmas season. And being told that we have hope can seem, well, sort of naive. What does hope mean? Does it mean that we pretend things aren't so bad? Does it ask us to just place our trust in God who will magically make things better? Hope is often confused with optimism, but the two are not the same. In preparing for the sermon, I found this quote from Arthur Brooks that summarizes very succinctly the difference. He reports that there was a study on hope and optimism, and he summarized it that hope focuses more directly on personal attainment of specific goals, whereas optimism focuses more broadly on the expected quality of future outcomes in general. In other words, he says, optimism is the belief that things will turn out all right. Hope makes no such assumption, but it is a conviction that one can act to make things better in some ways. Hope is something that you hold yourself. It's something you act to make real, whereas optimism is more of a worldview. No matter what I see, things are going to work out. And we often mush these two together, but they're quite different. Now, how about each of you? If I had to put you on the spot, and maybe during the discussion we can get into this, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Do you always say things are going to work out, I'm not worried? Or are you always looking at, well, this could go wrong at any time? Now, in my own life, and I'm going to share some personal stuff about myself in this to make it a little bit more real this Sunday, and say that most people find me in life generally very optimistic, and they would even say naively optimistic is what I'm told. But the truth is that when I reflect on myself, the real truth is I'm very full of hope, and I'm a very pessimistic person. So there's a paradox there. I generally think things won't work out. And I'm always looking for the red flags. In my coaching strategy practice, I've learned to harness my pessimism. I see where things will go wrong. I hear very complicated solutions, and I try to simplify them to increase the chance of success. I hear utopian visions of the future that lack a clear plan, and I get nervous. I want small steps, step by step, to get there to the goal. And I realize that one reason I work with accountants is that there's something about accountants that know the truth in numbers. They're very good at the details, and they can tell you a true story of an organization, not what they're projecting to the public, but what's really going on behind the curtain. So my pessimism, I feel, helps me create more successful strategies because I'm looking for where things can go wrong. Now, the downside of this is I can also be the messenger of bad news. But just being pessimistic alone doesn't work. I need hope. My hope, which is given to me by the grace of God, lets me imagine a better world and believe I have an important role to play while recognizing that all good things come from God. I do have a role to play, but it doesn't depend on me. If I do my part, I believe I'll be met by the angels who will help me make it real. So that's a paradox. I've long been attracted to Stephen Covey's hugely impactful book called 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. In that book, he speaks about a paradox. And you've heard me say in other sermons that spiritual truths are often operating in paradox. In that book, he talks about the Stockdale paradox, referring to Admiral Stockdale's account of how he survived in a Vietnam prisoner of war camp. He reports that the optimists among the prisoners did not do well. He notes, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come, and Christmas would go, and Easter would come, and Easter would go, and then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again, and they died of a broken heart. The Stockdale paradox invites us to look at the world as it really is and see the reality of all that is wrong and all that is evil. And at the same time, be hopeful that a solution will arrive. We can start this paradox in our own lives before we start looking at the world. We can look at ourselves and know that all spiritual growth happens by self-awareness. Can we look at ourselves deeply and see all that's wrong, all that's not right, and understand that that's where we're going to have to change? We have to develop an ability not to sugarcoat things about ourselves or about the world. The further we grow in our spiritual practice, the better our ability to see our weaknesses. So this is a spiritual practice that marries our ability to look deeply into evil with the hope and knowledge that we can play a role to make things better. This, for me, is the power of hope. It's not ignoring the reality of evil. It is not passively waiting for God to solve things. It is the ability to be very honest with yourself and the world and know that you can make a difference. If we are not honest with ourselves, we'll have a very tough time doing that with the world. So very often Swedenborg's writings are somewhat tough to understand in the way that he writes, but there is a phrase in this week's reading that I found really distills something very powerful. It could be a bumper sticker. He says, when fear is taken away, hope is present. The choice between hope and reality, the choice in our real lives it's a choice between hope and fear. And just to be sure, and scientists will back this up, we are more likely to be motivated by fear than hope. Now, we tend to dismiss fear, but fear can play a valuable role in the very short run in our lives. It can wake us up to our shortcomings. It can warn us that we have to do something different. Fear can actually help us get to that brutal assessment of the facts. But we cannot live in fear. Fear will destroy us. Fear, when we live in that house, opens us up to the hells. We live in a culture where we are marketed to daily based on our fears. It's no wonder everybody's so anxious. And our news programs know that if they can scare us, they can motivate us to watch and they can sell more products. We need to move to a spiritual practice of hope and act to change things for the better. A future, by the way, we cannot imagine. Again, in my own life, I've experienced that hope can win out. It's not based on some abstract theological teaching. It's based in my own life experiences. In the 1980s, I volunteered to help dying AIDS patients. I could not imagine that in the 1990s, I'd be testifying before Congress to get new AIDS drugs. But I had hope, and hope didn't let me down. It was a call to action. Beware of fear that encourages you to give up hope. Now, one of the topics that many of you have raised with me on various occasions is the issue of climate change as something to be very concerned about, if not afraid about the imminent demise of the Earth. So as best I can tell, climate change and erratic weather patterns are very real. We can experience them and we can see the various studies that are taking place. But believing scientists who tell us there's no point in doing anything because in a decade it will be over is a matter of faith. You have to believe in them. There's no proof for sure that what they're saying is true. And I encourage us to beware of a fear that paralyzes us, as this could. Again, I weigh carefully when experts tell me what to fear, and I look at my own experience. In the area of science, I grew up in high school in the 70s, being told to fear that the ozone would be destroyed by the time I was an adult. I literally ran around my house, grabbing Right Guard, the deodorant spray, and throwing them in the trash for fear that the ozone would be gone because of spraying these aerosols. Then in college in the 80s, I was told that nuclear war would destroy the Earth within a decade. In the 90s, I was told that the AIDS pandemic would sweep across the globe, destroying entire nations. And in 2009, at a climate conference, I was told that there was a 75% chance that the ice in the Arctic would be gone within 5 to 7 years. So I'm not debating the issue of climate change. I'm just wanting to point out that they don't always get it right. And we have to marry up our concern about it without becoming paralyzed by predictions of our demise, because those predictions of our demise have been with us throughout history. I looked up recently to find out what the status of the ozone was, something I was so anxious about in the 70s. And read a report said the ozone hole is getting better and will get better, said the scientist, saying it's not every day a scientific horror story has a happy ending. Nobody saw that coming either. Getting those brutal facts in our life, in the life of the world, are getting more challenging because we have people giving us information with competing political agendas, and most campaigns are based on fear. The challenge for us is not to become captured by fear. If you find yourself captured by fear, examine why and what impact it's having on your life. We all remember the famous quote of FDR, who said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." But few of us remember the second half of his sentence. He said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts." Wise and hopeful words to a nation facing a frightening reality. We must not become captive to nameless, unreasoning, and unjustified terror, or we'll become paralyzed. Instead, this is where faith comes in. We need to place our trust in the Lord and know that God's divine providence is seeking to do good on earth and looking for good people willing to act to make it so. This Advent, let us work to become people who place their trust in God, who gives us the hope. And remember the words of Jesus: "Peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Amen.